figured that 5 minutes might be allowed to be a generous 10. I know in each of our cases, certainly in my case, we've been working on this aspect of the job for a little over 10 years. And I couldn't imagine how I could figure out how to represent the breadth of what we're trying at least to do in 5 minutes. So I thought I might be able to pick up on the theme that Christine Carrs introduced this morning about the journey that one is taking, where really it begins with the cultivation of an attitude and putting all of the staff basically on that learning curve. So some of what I have to show you will underline as examples of the kind of things that were on that set of meetings that Christine would have had with the board on a regular basis. In fact, if any of you have been to IKEA lately, you might have noticed that they have a program that covers off public communication about their sustainability and community partnership initiatives that they've decided to call the never-ending list. And I thought, boy, is that as close to what we've been feeling for the last 10 years working on this. And it really was a sink or swim sort of thing, where if we were honest with ourselves about the nature of the task, once we had identified the range of things that we really wanted to accomplish and started to itemize it as a series of lists, imagine all the different formats, for example, that we might present the wrong experience in order to have it be a more inclusive relationship. And it was an incredibly daunting list. And so we decided to stop focusing on the areas where we were coming up short and just really think about the things that were accomplishments. And as a result, Christine Carrs sat down with all the sort of worker bees that were on, and we crafted a list. And it was that thing that she would come back to us before every meeting and ask, so guys, what are you going to give me this time that I can take to the board? And it was amazing how we were able to continuously generate improvement that knocked things off that list, but boy, things were added to it every place quickly. So this slide just stands for the fact that we're working on, I think, our third generation large print guide, which talks about the accessible features of the experience that we're on. We came up with a new symbol set based on international symbols that we wanted to be highly legible. And this, of course, includes a row in here of things that get at the nature of some experiences that 10 years ago we wouldn't have even imagined that we would have been capable of doing. I just wanted to point out on the subject of attitude, if you look at the way we treated the figures in these symbols, the usual sort of stick figure devoid of humanity we wanted to avoid. And I think Christine also advised about plagiarizing where possible. I think we found this universal access symbol, one very similar to that the Museum of Modern Art at the museum. And we really loved the fact that it focused on the person's ability. It looked like they were doing something and going somewhere, and so we designed all the rest of the symbol set around that one figure so that the people in the rest of the scenes were their equals. And the fact that it's active first, and the fact that there's a wheel involved is almost secondary, but of course that's part of the communication. And Christine, you'll forgive me if I show this picture, but there's just a world that's born out of this image. Yes, of course, we're a highly bureaucratized organization, as Judith Snow pointed out this morning. And one of the first things that Christine did is she figured out how to work not only with the grassroots level, working across all of the staff to inculcate this attitude of, now that I've done this, how can I consider all the other possible ways to make it more inclusive or accessible? She also worked from the top down to help them on create policy and practice. And this was just around the time that we were starting to work with the architect studio Leavesden on the Michael Beach in Bristol and the renovation of all the wood wings of the building. This was actually the former Maxwell Gallery. And so this is a road trip where the senior staff of the museum were taken to a cutting edge facility that didn't get open in order for us to look at things like the customer service desks. And Christine's not a complainer. She's not one whose perspective is about here are the troubles, here are the problems, let's remove the barriers. It was all about positive possible futures. And here's a brilliant moment where it was just clear all she needed to do was stand in front of this desk, and all the rest of us who were more vertical, whose heads are cut off in the sea, got it instantly. We were not going to design a customer service experience that felt and worked like this. And so this spawned a whole series of activities where we worked hand in hand with the architects and built endless cardboard and full core models in order to really improve that relationship. This is Cheryl Black, shaking hands with Joe Peters, who was here at the time, now head of tourism in Toronto. And because the architects came up with this idea of this big sloping plane for our first floor, all of our floor space and street level is in fact 5 feet above the street level. So this is a totally accessible lobby in the sense that everybody uses it the same way to get in. Well, it introduced other interesting problems, and then a very long ticket test, if it were level, which we wanted it to be for the comfort of the staff on our side of the desk, would develop a very extra tall head at one end. And so we tested this and a whole series of other ergonomic features for the desk to ensure that the repetitive tasks that our staff went through on one side and the range of heights of our staff. Here's a test that uses some of the taller staff on the visitor relations side. And what would that mean for visitors facing us across the desk, so far down the wall? And in the end, we're able to find this sweet spot where the desk again is sort of crowd that really underlined the message of the extreme architecture, the sort of bravery, dynamism of the leaves of crystal, but ended with a sit-down transaction space that was comfortable to use at the other end. And we've since enhanced this with various technology that include things like being able to communicate to you directly through your hearing aids, and if you prefer to communicate with us keyboard to keyboard, we can do that as well. So this is it's been a kind of infrastructure that we've been able to add to over the years. You heard this morning about this particular moment in our history. This, to me, says so many things. When the Outliner exhibit was here, which was a partnership with the School of Disability Studies at Ryerson, it was an education not only for our visitors, but for our staff. And the fact that all of the multiple means of presentation were available in the exhibit was a tremendous education for my own exhibit design staff. So all of the label text, for example, was available as audio podcast, sign language podcast, facilitated touchable objects in the exhibit, large print, braille, and so on. And the event was associated with this, where we had a very large turnout, as well had all the features of transcribed video and recording, which was then publishable. And again, it was a real learning opportunity for all of us who set up these things on a regular basis to understand what it's like to reach out to a more diverse audience. This is the actual dinosaur that Christine was referring to this morning. Christine, this is a myosaur. It's mother dinosaur. And this was part of a sort of grading of our existing audio program, which is the highlights of the museum. The idea was eventually I think we reached up to about 1 in every 3 of the objects on this audio tour are now available as a tactile experience as well. And it works with raised text that you can read, as well as simplified braille, French and English. This is our standard. And as well, for the audio program, we've been able to add at each of the stops a described audio experience for those who can, in fact, see the real artifact that's on display. This is from our Dead Sea Scrolls exhibition. I included this because it really was a kick for me. This was a show where we by the Dead Sea. And so there's a video, there's labeling of photographs, there's a map, community nearby, and there's a lovely model, eminently touchable looking, but I had to add a please do not touch sign to it. And so that's where I really sort of rubber hit the road. I really saw it, really desperately wanted to touch this thing. And I'm talking about everybody, not just people who felt they needed to touch it in order to understand it. And something we've taken on board exhibits since that time. In our Chinese Terracotta Warriors exhibition, we did have guides in various formats, including raised line diagram images of some of the feature objects in the exhibition, braille text that summarized, as well as a large print guide that pointed out the locations where there were touchable objects. Museums are very sensitive to the notion of putting fakes or reproductions in each of their exhibits, and we're not alone in worrying openly about that. And so it's always something that's important for us to make clear the difference between the stand-ins and the real thing. In this case, it was very opportunistic. We found a bunch of things on the internet that we could buy. This is actually a reproduction using the original play from the original site, painted up in such a way as we represented things that were posed in their day. And so it was the most realistic tactile version of the experience that we could manage. We had dramatic lighting, which was extremely low, so we used these backlit new LED panel technologies for the labels and banners so that they were relatively dark. This is an example of the touchable line drawings in the Maya exhibition. And we do worry openly about things like whether or not people who have never seen and understood perspective can understand perspective in a line drawing. We say, what the heck? And we just actually put both flat representations and perspective views out there on the floor. Because we do get feedback, and we do constantly test and ask whether these things are working. Now among the are able to touch in my exhibition for the downtown area of the city that was featured there. And we found that really in a universal and inclusive sense that these things do work for everybody. The kids are all over this, adults are touching, people who can see, people who will vision. Interest was very high for things like glyphs in the exhibit. And so this is an experience that captions sounds out in Maya tongue, each of the glyphs in turn, and you get to select English or French. And all of this was pre-tested with our Access Advisory Group. And we're very proud of these things, kind of things. I know that our colleagues at the Science Center are doing things like surtitling on all of their audio content for probably a couple of decades. And so it's the sort of thing that we're almost constantly just keeping our eyes open and looking around. And every time we're visiting a facility, we're looking for these great ideas. I just want to end with this. Coming up, our new Ultimate Dinosaurs exhibition will include probably 50 iPads and all kinds of technology, including augmented reality, in order to provide context to missing imagery that isn't there, that you can't imagine by looking at a dinosaur skeleton alone. So these are actually reactive walls, and they just sense the presence of the visitors. They're not touching the computer should sense it. They have other sensitivity zones. Imagine you approach it the way you would a Connects game or a Wii game. And so it will respond and bring these scenic treatments to life depending on the nature of the position in front of the screens. And I just want to end by saying one of the most important things for all of us in the learning curve is to remember our own personal journey in figuring out what makes a great connected experience for visitors in the museum setting. For me, I remember my youngest visit to the mall. What was that? One of those incredible school trips where you actually got to touch real stuff. I'll never forget that. And secondly, is I used to touch stuff I'm not sure I was permitted to. There was a meteor on it, and it was smooth and hollowed out by its entry into Earth's atmosphere. And that was something I would never forget. And so that really is the sort of thing that says, whatever the most visceral, most connected way to think about doing things, don't forget, these are old school, all the technology in the world will offer us a bright future, but there are some really simple, straightforward things that we can do that will find resonance and find traction with all of our visitors. So in this show, we're actually going to be able to display these large reproductions of the vertebrate of the dinosaur. Imagine the dinosaur like in a single dollar. We're going to ask people to imagine that. And this is our resident paleontologist, David Evans, and holding some real dinosaur fossil teeth that we're going to be able to hand around. And I just want to end by saying, There was no greater moment in the sort of 10 years of this process than when we had Judith's exhibit on the room next door. But it was the presence of someone like Judith in that space who was able to facilitate the experience for the visitors. That someone was able to come and encounter the message of the paintings in that exhibition. Not only, but primarily, the person. And encounter, first of all, her humanity and her intellect. And upwards, probably her creativity, long before they would even begin to think about the fact that they lived here. And I think that's really the legacy that Christine Garza has created for us, and trying to figure out what to do.
I wanted to start with this image, which is a really great way to start talking about how we look at accessibility in the Science Center. You remember what the front of the Science Center used to look like, right? It was a pool, it was an eyeball. You had to walk a flight of stairs to get to the front door. We're not discounting the amazing architecture itself, but that's not exactly the inclusive way to say to people, come on in. This is a place for people. This is a place for Ontario. And the space you see here is actually called Telescape. And if you really look at it in a very simple way, it doesn't. There we go. No, it's actually. If you follow that, this is a really nice way to design a ramp. So that you can go from street level at Don Mills Road to the front door. You want to make sure that it's accessible to get in. You want to make sure that it feels easy. Why not stop on the way at an art piece in the center here, that Steve Land's piece, Fontaine, and play around with water, and you realize that the grade's changing. Move yourself from here, all of a sudden over here there's a demo and an outside theater, and then you get in the front door. You don't have to make it a ramp, feel like it's a ramp. You make it a part of the landscape of what you see. And when we did the renovation of the Science Center, and we decided to change most of the building, in that sense, about 40% of the building, we thought maybe there are ways to start to look at doing these moments in a way that people don't notice that it's on there. They notice that it's part of everything, and it's a space for everyone. On top of that, too, this is a great space for Tai Chi. But this summer, you'll see some moments. I find it interesting that we're putting together some of these images because I can see our development as a design department, and also as scientists, and also as hosts. This circus is coming back this summer. We design exhibits that travel, and we design exhibits that are also hosted here at the Science Center specifically. And so if you look at this, you've got a young man over here on Highwire. If you look at the other side here, you've actually got a person hopping up and down, bungee jumping. I'm not doing any of these things. But people like to do these things, and so sometimes we like to watch people do these things. And we can set up a situation where it's an urban feeling, and people who actually aren't participating in it feel like they're still part of the action. They're realistic things and everything, like wait times, there's height restrictions, there's weight restrictions, there's how busy the day is it. So there's always a moment where as a host you have to start to assess how do you make this space, or how do you make things a little more accessible to people, or how can you make a situation where if you have a group of people who are going to watch the experience, they feel like they're still part of it. In this experience, we decided to supplement a lot of these experiences such as the high wire and the acrobatics, with things like watching a sword swallower. We actually found the sword swallower, and we actually did an X-ray watching it go in. So you could actually sit there and pull the sword up and down and shove the sword back up and down and inside some This is really fun. And we also did a great thing too, which personally, because kids love food. So why not line up food in a huge line down a hallway so that it's at a certain height, and you can investigate different castings. But we're collecting the castings with a lot of fun. And you would have these castings that kids can play with. But by doing these experiences, you realize what heights feel right. How do you set up situations that people feel that they're part of something while they're watching an activity? A lot of times we like to do practice runs, go around the Science Center in a blindfold, put yourself in a wheelchair, use vision, different glasses, and see what happens. We've led to developments such as the wheelchair racing that we had in sport, which we're redoing for our Human Limits experience in 2015. And also this experience of Facing Mars. This is an exhibit about proximity. This entire part of the exhibit, which is back here, is all dependent This is a current exhibit that I'm working on now. It's actually touring into the Lawrence Hall of Science, and these experiences are also coming back to the Science Center. And this is really about fully trying to make an experience that everyone can enjoy and also be a part of. This is imagining, and we did things such as workstations, which you see at the top. You can go up, you can go down, you can go left, you can go right. You move those workstations, and out of those workstations, there's a hot glue gun, there's scissors. You can create birdhouses, you can create shoes, you can glue your brother's fingers together, whatever makes you feel that's the right thing to do at the time. These are all experiences that happen. Yourself to those things. You can get close to ferrofluid, or watch a ferrofluid hedgehog, the active fly. Actually inside there, the magnets that pull up and down, making sure you got clearance to it. Tunnel tubes, touch tables, FaceTime with a lot of where you can actually take a photo of your face and do some really cheap plastic surgery on guard for people's eyes and noses to make it face. But the reality of all this is that we do different table heights, make sure the materials start 4 inches off the floor to the perfect height maybe if you're holding a kid and you want to just see the material in front of you. Really trying to make everything close to you. But there's a way to hook up the pro-scope to the materials that you can really get at a properly heighted table. This is Telltale Heart. It's a personal favorite of mine. And part of the idea here is that everyone has a pulse. That's something we hope for every physician that we have. That's kind of the entry point. So why not use what everyone has to do something collectively together? So what happens is we come to one of those platforms, and then make sure it's very clear and neat so that you can get to it in a different position. And as more people collect themselves and take their pulse, it takes your pulse reading, transmits it up in LEDs at the top. It transmits it up the sides, and it also builds at the top. So the more people that come and play along with it, the more light show you get. The noise is somewhere between a gunshot and a drum. So you just try to create the right sound as people's heartbeats. But we came to this kind of in-between noise layers as well. But the idea of color and how we use light also, we really want to focus on. So maybe we really focus on some differences in vision, but also work with the sound as well. On the left, we're doing some work as a new space in the Weston Family Innovation Center. And this space is basically as accessible as you can get. We're trying to set up a system where there's zoetrope, there's new cradles, there's polarized art. It's all on shelves, but it all can come off the shelves. So that is when you're in the space, you can take everything off. And you can work the tables, you can investigate things at their own pleasure in the space. We want to make sure that people are easily get to things within the space. Those center points here are actually discovery boxes that you can pull out and things there and stuff. And right here, this is our work that we did for the World Botanical Gardens. And as you were saying, one of the things we really like to do here is that in English and French, you can switch through the videos and you can get words, text at the base, making sure you really focus on a very clear background where the word is put up. Making sure that if you're in a wheelchair and you come to the base of that wall, you can open up and get a really great look at looking at a barbaric sample that's below. And making sure that there's lots of opportunities to have that as you work your way around. We also want to focus a lot on referencing things you see at World Botanical Gardens because it's about touch. It's about seeing flowers. It's about seeing trees. It's about feeling bark. So why not use the wood, cut etches in it that are in the shapes of things that you would see at World Botanical Gardens. You can take your hand and feel around in the work. And it's a real, I really am happy because you see people kind of feeling the walls. As far as I'm concerned, that means that they're kind of, the experiences are getting them out of themselves and they're sort of feeling themselves like. So that's what I wanted to show you today. Just wanted to give you an idea of where we're going. I find that this is a good way to end it too, in the sense of where we're at. And we're always trying to keep ourselves open to new experiences and thinking about specifically who our user groups are going to be and how to use those experiences. Thank you.
You're making me blush. Actually, it's quite interesting. We were talking about touch and the importance of touch, and I always find it very curious. What do we mean when we say, let me see that? We're already seeing it in most cases. We're, in fact, wanting to handle it, to manipulate So thank you very much for that very, very embarrassing introduction. As was said, I'm with the Inclusive Design Research Center, and basically the main thing you need to know about us is what we're trying to do is to make sure that all of those things, those emerging designs that are coming out in terms of information and communication technology are designed for everyone, designed for diversity, whether it's designed with respect to ability, language, culture, gender, age, and other forms of human difference. So we try to design for human diversity. And we're proactively addressing the beginning of the ICT food chain. It's a lot of work when you have to retrofit. It's a lot of work when something is already quite well established, as you probably noted when people were talking about things. So what we try to do is to seek the very beginnings of these emerging practices. And we're a fairly sizable group over at WCAG with partners around the world, more than 96 partners in every continent. And we welcome partnership and participation in either our open source communities or in our projects. One of the things we recognize right from the beginning is that none of us really are average or typical. I saw a bunch of Starbucks cups coming to here, and I would wager a bet that there was probably not the same request for any of the cups that arrived in here. And the most amazing and wonderful thing about living in this age is that we are experiencing this disruptive time when technology there's all sorts of things that are horrible about technology, but there's one thing that's quite nice, and that is that it allows flexibility. And so when we're designing in a digital time, unlike having to design a building which is made out of bricks and mortar, we have the opportunity to really rethink disability and accessibility. And so when we're designing, we have this new notion of disability, which is that disability is a mismatch between the needs of the individual, the services, tools, or environment. It's not a personal trait. It's relative to the context and the goals. We can all be experiencing a disability, and it's the responsibility of the design, the environment, the service, the product to make sure that it matches our particular needs. And so if someone, say, is blind and is sitting in an auditorium and listening to a lecture that's all in audio, they're probably far less disabled than someone that's been up all night till 2 a.m. and drunk a little bit too much and hasn't taken care of learning the background information. Similar, and I can come up with many different examples. So accessible design, as we define it, is determined by the natural fit between the user and the tool, service, or environment, and that as well is relative. And in the digital realm, we can have what we call one-size-fits-one design, personally optimized fit, mass customization, adaptive design. And you might ask, especially in a museum environment, especially with economic times as they are, and the difficulty in designing is anything for the whole variety of users. This is really realistic. But if you think of it, digital really does enable personally optimized fit for close to zero incremental cost, because you can copy largely without cost. It does need to be built into the systems from the start. We do need modularity, we do need transformability, and we do need open standards because things change constantly, and so we need a common language to update our designs. And the other thing, of course, that's happening at the moment in terms of our digital economy, our digital times, is that we have networks, and so we can recruit many helpers, many friends, distributed production, crowdsourcing, variants, cumulative collaborative design and development, and iterative refinement. We can all band together as museums or galleries and share and refine things and recruit other volunteers that are out there. So the types of things that we work on are a lot of open source reusable web components and resources for those of you who want to create accessible websites, and also want usable websites that are going to adapt to the needs of each visitor. we have things that allow you to cause your web experience to adapt to the individual that's encountering your web system. We have accessible tools for doing the sorts of tasks that you need to do within a museum, because one of the things we also recognize is that employees with disabilities also require access, and so many of the tools that we're creating for museum environment include the types of tools that an employee with a disability might want to use. And we work on ways to capture and manage collections. And we have a lot of educational resources that step you through what you need to do. We integrate these, we use the same tools that we've created for individuals with disabilities to also make sure that things can be translated into multiple languages, can be presented in multiple languages. And in some of our tools, for example, here we have 56 different languages that we're working on. And we're not, when I was talking about touch, our work does relate to touch because we're working on things like 3D printing of tactile replicas and 3D printing of tactile replicas that then have touchable spots which will allow audio to play and describe what can, something about a particular resource. The examples you see here, of course, are of two-dimensional paintings, and so that this is, these are bas reliefs of two-dimensional paintings, so that someone who's blind can get a sense of the masterpieces that are within a gallery. We work on accessible kiosks, both physical designs of kiosks, so that a child, a very tall person, or someone in a wheelchair can reach the kiosk, see the kiosk, various controls, so that even someone that doesn't have any voluntary pointing action can still control the kiosk. Mobile experiences of various forms, whether it's in museum, post-museum, pre-museum experiences and applications, and these are all examples. We also try to recognize